I want to go back to the phone lines. We'll talk next to Jason, another Jason, this one a long ways away in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Hi, Jason.
Howdy. I just got a question regarding the creation story in Genesis. I guess without assuming that every single story or tale or myth in the Bible is not to be taken literally, as people tend to quote Scripture rather literally, what is the consensus or opinion or factuality behind when God creates night and day before creating the stars and the very things in the universe that, I guess, night and day are responsible for?
Well, you make a very profound point when you talk about the literal principle of biblical interpretation. The literal principle of biblical interpretation, of course, does not mean that you take things in a wooden literal sense, but you always take things in the sense in which they're intended. Language, by its very nature, is metaphorical, and metaphors are not vacuous expressions, but they're magnifying glasses that illuminate truth that we might otherwise miss. What's going on in the creation accounts is not a chronology, but a hierarchy of creation. So the intent is to give us a way of remembering God's creative prowess, culminating in the crowning jewel of his creation, humankind. So the days themselves are a literary framework by which we can remember that God created everything and that the crowning jewel of God's creation is humankind. Now, obviously, in an age of scientific enlightenment, you have to believe that there is a uncaused first cause that causes everything, unless you want to stretch your credulity beyond the breaking point. The reason being is that we know that nothing cannot create everything, and that, of course, is the problem with the evolutionary paradigm. You have to inevitably believe that nothing creates everything, that life comes from non-life, and that the life that comes from non-life creates morals. If you can believe that, I suppose you can believe just about anything. In the biblical account, however, we have an uncaused first cause that speaks and the universe leaps into existence. So every effect, an effect like the universe, has to have a cause equal to or greater than itself.
So in that context, I guess what you're saying is chronology doesn't matter as far as a creation story yet.
Well, I'm not saying chronology doesn't matter. What I'm suggesting here is that chronology is not at issue, which is to say that if you want to find chronology, you don't find that in the Genesis account. There is a chronology there, but the issue is not to give you the timing. If you want to find the timing, then you have to pay particular attention to the effect itself, to the creation that God has made, because there you see his divine nature and his eternal power being apparent to those that look, so that we're without excuse.
So on the first day, on the second day, on the third day really doesn't mean anything, is basically what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that it means a great deal, but the meaning is not chronological, the meaning is chirological.
And not to be taken literally?
Well, I've just defined what literal is. What do you understand by literal?
Well, you explained the creation story as one not to be taken chronologically or literally, which basically states...
No, I'm not saying that there's not a chronology. I'm saying the purpose of the literary framework is so that we might remember God's purposes in creation, to wit the word kairos. So I'm not saying that there is not a chronology. I'm simply saying that the point of the 7-day creation narrative is that we might remember that God created everything, and that remembrance is linked to the 7-day cycle of life, such that every day we remember that it is God who created all things, whether it's man or animals, whether it's separating the water from the land. God did everything. So God is the creator of all things, and the purpose of his creation is, in fact, humankind in fellowship with him. And so God created man in such a way that we could have relationship with him, not only for time, but also for eternity. And God created humankind in such a way that relationship is volitional. It's not forced. So God created the potential for evil. Human beings actualize that evil, but even within the narrative, you have very early on in Genesis chapter 3, God's purpose in creation, not to scrap things, but to redeem and reconcile things. And so the box top of Scripture, as it were, is Adam and Eve falling into lives of perpetual sin terminated by death, the rest of the Bible being God's unfolding plan of redemption, culminating in a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness, which is to say that this universe, which now groans in travail, will one day be liberated from its bondage to decay. So the purposes of God are communicated explicitly and directly. Now, if you look at Genesis overall, you find that it is a mnemonic. On one hand, you have primordial history. So you have the account of creation. Then you have the account of the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. Then you have the account of Noah, Noah's sons. And then you have the account of Shem, the father of all ancient Near Eastern cultures. And this is given to us in such a way that we can remember them. You also, on the other hand, can remember the patriarchs, and I'm sure that you could list them for me quite readily, because anyone that's read through the book of Genesis understands that that account is given to us so we can remember them with the 10 fingers of our hands, so we'll never get confused, that we understand God's purposes in creation, Genesis being the genesis of the unfolding plan that culminates in a tree of life that we see in Revelation chapter 22. And we have to learn to read the Bible for all it's worth. It is literature, it's infallible, inspired, but it's literature nonetheless, and therefore it employs a whole host of literary genres